So good morning. Is this on? Yes. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kathleen Koch, and I will be your moderator today. And we're here to talk about cities. Right now, it's more than half of the world's population lives in cities, and the prediction is that by 2050 it will be 68%. So I think the question we're going to be exploring here today is really how do we handle this massive urban expansion in a controlled and sustainable way? Can technology help? And how will these new urban centers, how will they evolve? Will they become hubs, smart hubs of innovation? So I have, as you can see, a fabulous panel here to discuss it. So immediately on my left is Andreas Klugescheid, and he's BMW Group's Vice President of Governmental Affairs. You may recognize the gentleman next to him, the good mayor of the lovely city of Bratislava, Matúš Vallo. And then next is Vazil Hudák, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. And then finally, Jan. And Jan Mischke, partner at McKinsey Global Institute. So welcome, my panel. And Mr. Mayor, I would like to, or shall I call you Matúš? Is that fine?
Matúš sounds perfect.
I would love to start with you. So first of all, thank you again for hosting GlobeSec here in Bratislava. This is my 6th year to moderate, so I enjoy coming here. And my first question to you is, I understand your election was rather extraordinary because you were campaigning with a plan, and this was not a short plan, a 300-page Bratislava plan put together by 30 experts, laying out your vision, your future vision for this city, how to improve it. And I am only a visitor here, but it seems perfect to me. So what is your vision? How do you want to make Bratislava different as it moves forward?
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me say that I'm so proud that we have GlobeSec in Bratislava, and we will cooperate more with GlobeSec to have every year a better conference and a better environment for this fabulous meeting of whole world. And of course, we made a plan Bratislava, as you said, was made by 76 in the end, the professionals from different levels of city government, and there was something different because everybody told me before I start my campaign, you need to be a face who knows every very well-known face, and you need to be in television. And I said, no, I would like to try to go with program. And in this kind of Central Europe, in election, the program is for somebody is maybe too old school, or just everybody say the famous spin doctors from different agencies. We always say nobody listened to the program, but anyway we tried it, and we in the end there was in the end the Plan Bratislava is a huge 600-page document on internet. We published the book, which is 300-page, big, and is more accessible for common public, right. Let's say.
Now, so how is it going? I realize you've only been in office how many months now?
Actually, after tomorrow is 6 months.
6
exactly.
months, right? And I know you can't expect a lot to be achieved.
Sorry, today. Actually, today is 6 months.
Oh, happy anniversary. So can you tell us about, just briefly, the progress you're making on any of the points in the plan, concrete progress at this point?
I need to say that I have this idea that if I want to do something in a very good way, I need to have a good plan and the team. But after 6 months, I need to say that I'm so happy I have this book, I have this manual, because in the end it's a manual for Better Bratislava. And I'm just following every day the steps that we've wrote in.
So it's a roadmap.
It's a roadmap, and it's my only help I have, because there are so many problems in the city, everybody knows it, and to talk about the future, the strategies, the vision, there is no real time during these months, so I'm so glad I have it, and we are, with all my team, we're following it very closely.
Jan, I'd like to ask you to help for us to define the concept of smart cities. We're going to be talking about that a lot today. So, what is a smart city? What does that actually entail? And how do you retrofit an existing municipality to make it smart?
Yeah, so we refer to smart cities in terms of adding digital intelligence to achieve better quality of life outcomes. That's really what it is about. And that has three layers. It has the most commonly referred to traditional technology layer, which is about networked sensors and devices, which is also then a good part of the retrofitting, say, cameras along the streets, to give an example. But it has also, very importantly, two more layers. So one is, or the second one is the data analytics and applications, without which the sensors and networks don't do much good. So to give an example from crime incidents, if you had used the cameras, for instance, for gunshot detection, that would be an application and data analytics. But then thirdly, and as importantly, it's about usage and changing behavior. So to stay with that example, if you then deployed, for instance, predictive policing, where you know from the big data analysis there is going to be some incidents or a high likelihood of some incident in an area, you actually massively change the crime outcomes in a city.
Well, on that point, your organization, McKinsey Global Institute, last year studied how dozens of smart city applications, if they put them to use, how they would impact 3 sample cities. And I have to share these numbers because they're fabulous. They found the tools would reduce fatalities by 8 to 10%, accelerate emergency response times in those cities by 20 to 35%, shorten the average commute by 15 to 20%, lower the disease burden by 8 to 15%, and cut greenhouse gas emissions by 10 to 15%. And those are just some of the positive outcomes that they found. So, Vazil, I know that the European Investment Bank has created a smart cities and regions initiative. So you're a real leader in financing projects like this. I mean, with numbers like those that I just cited, you must have cities banging down the door saying, make us smart. We want to be the next smart city. So how do you choose? How do you select the cities that you take on? And are they always the largest cities? Are we talking second-tier cities? Where do you see the highest degree of success?
Yeah, maybe just taking a step, one step back. I think I like the phrase "think globally, act locally," and I think this very much applies to cities and to local and regional development. What we see when we look at the cities is a kind of two-dimension issue. On one hand, cities represent, as you mentioned, a big part of the global population. According to the OECD forecast, by 2100, it should be 85% of global population. Cities generate approximately 82% of global GDP. But on the other hand, cities also generate 65% of CO2 emissions. So you can, on one hand, see the challenges in terms of environment, in terms of transport. I think the mayor experienced the transport in Bratislava this morning, and some of us as well. A good
but
one.
He's here. He made it.
Good experience. And of course, you have issues related to migration, to social cohesion, etc. But on the other hand, also you see cities as real sources and hubs of innovation, hubs of dynamics for economy. And this is something which we want to utilize also through financing and supporting so-called smart cities concept. The way how we define is we basically don't differentiate too much between the big and small cities. And actually, when we did an analysis of cities in Central Eastern Europe, we came with the conclusion that the market gap which exists in terms of financing, in terms of potential, are so-called second-tier cities. So there is
and you work to fill the gaps.
And we are trying to, because we are a public development bank, so our role is not to replace commercial banking and the private sources of financing which are available, but to really focus on those gaps which exist in the market. For us, smaller cities, second-tier cities, it doesn't mean that we exclude Bratislava. Actually, we have very strong, as Mayor knows, very strong cooperation with Bratislava and the capital cities. But we believe that there is a huge potential in the second-tier cities area, and for those we are trying to create so-called investment platforms, basically a way how we pool resources and how we work, especially with the national development banks, to provide bigger pools of money which can be then translated into financing for specific smart solutions for cities and regions.
Interesting. So, Andreas, I understand that BMW back in 2010 started a very interesting project. You started dialoguing with cities around the world about their problems and looking at how BMW could perhaps help them with those. And so over that time, you visited some 36 cities, and you've most recently been looking at the issue of mobility. What were you hearing as you went around the world and talked to these cities about their struggles? What did the BMW Group learn from that?
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen, and thanks for being here.
And thanks for making the drove down last night from Berlin.
I
Correct?
had to because my flight was cancelled. And before I answer your question, just one anecdotal observation that I had yesterday also in Berlin, just to show where we are currently. You know, everybody talks about smart cities, but I drove yesterday through one of the longer streets of roads of Berlin, probably 6-7 kilometers long. I drove Volkswagen when I was a teenager. Since then, I've changed my habits. Now, coincidentally, I felt the comfort and beauty of a BMW I was sitting in. But just to be serious here, so everybody talks about smart cities. When I drove down that long stretch of road in Berlin, probably every 800 meters to 1 kilometer, there was a traffic light. And yes, you can guess, I had to stop at pretty every of these traffic lights. So the status quo is not that these cities are smart, right? The status quo is actually that many of the possibilities and potentials that we have already today are not actually utilized for whatever reason. You know, I don't want to judge here. There are cities that do a better job. There are cities that do a less good job. But, you know, the basics at times are not yet there.
And was mobility one of the issues that cities were struggling with the most when you talked to them?
Well, you know, we did these stakeholder dialogues in with the attitude of listening. So it was not like, you know, here comes BMW, you have all the solutions, don't worry anymore. But we rather want to understand what is happening in the cities, because cities are important for us because of the reasons mentioned, but also, and very much so, because that our customers are actually in these cities. So it's about GDP, it's about innovation, but it's also about customers. So we want to understand what they think. But we also took senior experts from city governments. We asked students. We asked the general population. And clearly, the top priority for everyone is seamless mobility. So it's not about the actual means of transportation anymore. It's not about, do I want to have a car? Do I prefer the bus or whatever? I just want to have the most convenient, probably the best priced, and at times also the least emission-driven way to move from A to B. And that's the task that we see coming, really, is to let's say, to match different modes of transportation in order to give the customer the best way to move from A to B. What that means for a car company is a question, certainly, for us right now.
Fascinating. Well, Matúš, I wanted to give you the opportunity because Andreas brought up the issue that you had getting here. So how is Bratislava addressing that, the challenge of mobility, getting in and out of the city in a speedy, non-emitting way?
Firstly, I want to say that even if I very appreciated this new level of technology which city must be work with, I'm always very careful with expression smart cities. It's always and if we are talking about the smart cities, always end that somebody wants to sell me some software, you know. So in a way, I prefer, or in our environment or group of people who are talking on European level about the cities, I prefer like thinking cities or something like the cities who are able to judge the best way or to find the best solution. Sometimes it's the old school way. Many times are the new technologies involved. And of course, I'm glad you said that we are not talking. We are using expression mobility as well. That's the main way. Also in Bratislava plan, we're always using this because in the end, it's about how we are moving from A to B in our city, and people want to do that maybe with not so many money and in a very quick and safe way. And in Bratislava, the aim is clear. I'm the big fan, and there was also in my campaign that public transport is the way. It's funny that we are only like 40 or 50 kilometers from Vienna, which is in many levels the best in the world. And I actually this week had an official meeting with the mayor of Vienna. So I spent the whole day in Vienna, and we asked them for 3 different workshops with my team. And their problem is they have very good infrastructure for cycling, segregated bike lines, but they are not able to really get people on bikes because the public transport is so good that people just using public transport. So this is the level I would like to go.
Okay. I was going to say it's not a bad problem.
That's fantastic problem, and I'm very happy that we can learn from the best. But in terms of mobility, cars, sorry for that, but cars are just not a very good place right now in Bratislava.
I know some cities are
are
looking at things like congestion pricing, charging you if you want to drive around in your vehicle during busy times. Is that something you're seeing more cities look at, your city might look at?
I was actually living in London in 2004 when they started as the first city in Europe congestion charge. The time was £5, I think. Today is 11.50. So it's crazy how this regulation how strong are these regulation. We of course we are talking now on 2 topics in Bratislava. First one is congestion charge, but we prefer. And we are doing it are the just normal parking policies regulations. So everybody
making parking more expensive.
Yeah, making parking. That's yeah. I will never use this, but the reality is, I would like to talk about the fair way how to use the public space, for example. Okay.
All right, let's give the mayor a break. Jan, one of the issues that so many cities grapple with as they grow is housing. Give us your thoughts on how cities can move forward in that area, because that's difficult, especially cities that are already very congested and don't have extra space.
Yeah, and I very much like the idea of rather like thinking than only say smart cities, because of course it's great to have lots of sensors, but if people don't have a decent place to live and participate in society and work life, there's no good. So we do need cities to plan for future growth. We heard the stunning numbers on how many future additional urban residents there will be. Yet the status quo is that already today 330 million urban households in the world cannot afford decent places to live. And the gap between what they can afford and what it would cost to house them decently is $650 billion a year. Now, for too long, particularly in, say, the Western world, we have been thinking about this problem as a financial problem. We have been trying to throw finance at the problem. And then what comes out is what you see also. London is a good example, or say, bad example in that regard. You throw a lot of financing at the problem and at people. You see house prices rise 5-fold over 20 years, and supply doesn't move at all. There's no supply response because the issue is a supply issue, much more than a finance or demand issue. And this is, I think, where cities need to plan forward to how to accommodate growth. That's kind of what a thinking city needs to do. And where to find the space for additional housing and how to deliver it productively. And quite often it's actually not as impossible as it may seem. We did an analysis in California, which is, as everyone knows, a pretty dense place where people would say, well, it's also difficult to find all that additional housing, and we all know it's a very unaffordable place as well. But just with geospatial analysis to give it some smartness again, we found space for 3.5 million homes within existing urban boundaries.
So what are cities missing? What are they not looking at that you saw?
Yeah, effectively, there's a lot of unused or underused urban land plots for all kinds of reasons. There's sometimes it's related to speculation and just sitting on the plats to wait for prices to appreciate. It's sometimes because of zoning or building code requirements that make it too expensive to redevelop, and so on. So there's a lot of things that can be changed. And then there's the more, say, fundamental shifts, particularly moving towards dense transit-oriented development, where if you want to add a lot of housing to cities, of course you need the transport to bring people in and out. That is not easy. You cannot build massive new highways in existing cities, at least not at good expenses. But most cities do have good transit hubs already. So if you increase the density around those and increase it actually massively, like 5 to 10x rather than 1.5x as most people, cities think about when they think densification, then you find those numbers of additional home supply.
Fascinating. Yes, Vazil, go ahead.
On this issue, because I think it's obviously housing is important, where we see, and as I mentioned, we are focusing very much on market gaps, where we see the need for a public development bank to be engaged. And in terms of housing in cities, we see three particular areas. One is exactly the development of housing in the areas which are difficult for the, real estate development. For example, brownfields. There are many brownfields, especially in Central Eastern Europe, where in the past you had industrial plants in the cities themselves. And they obviously have to be dealt with from the environmental point of view, but on the other hand, they represent quite an interesting area for real estate development.
So you clean those up and develop
So basically, but it's quite a risky operation, obviously, for any developer, because you also have to take on your shoulders the environmental aspects, etc. So there is a role.
But do countries here, though, cover that cost if you are developing the area? One would think
yes
they
and
might.
not. I mean, we have several projects. The most recent one I remember is in Warsaw, where there was a brownfield, basically old industrial plant in this basically center of Warsaw. And the real estate developer was trying to get commercial financing for the project, for residential housing. And it was impossible because there was just too much risk for commercial banks in terms of the environmental liabilities. So we had to step in and take a kind of first loss piece aspect, and then private sector came in. So that's one area. The other area is so-called near zero emission buildings. This is very important for cities, especially in moving towards clean cities, decreasing the energy consumption, etc. And I think this is something where many cities are now moving towards. And the third area is so-called social housing. What you mentioned is really the fact in many cities. I think in Germany there were demonstrations recently in Berlin and other places, because what you see is that the cost of housing and of rentals is going up. We also, things like Airbnb, people are basically renting their apartments for tourists and so on. And all this basically leads to the increase of the cost of housing and rentals. So there is a big pressure, and we recently supported, for example, social housing development in Austria, in Vienna. But we see more and more of this happening where actually the municipalities and the local governments have to take the lead in providing social housing for, especially for young families or the families who cannot afford to pay the current market prices.
Excellent. Andreas, I'd like to go back to talking about transportation with you. So as we look at these thinking or smart cities of the future, et cetera, and as the mayor mentioned, what will be the future of the vehicle? Are we looking at electric? Are we looking at autonomous? Are they just going away, as he suggested? And if so, if BMW is working toward that last goal, then aren't you working yourselves out of business?
So what we are doing right now in terms of a strategy, we are grouping our R&D investments around what we call the 4 ACEs. So that is autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared. And that implies what the mobility will look like. You know, it will be to a large degree autonomous in cities, and we are talking here not a future dream or anything like that, but we are talking basically, you know, in the case of BMW, autonomous vehicles being available as early as 2021, right? So that is 2 years from now, I guess.
Very soon.
And electrified is a no question topic anyway. You know, that is no longer something that people and cities do really think about. It is a given to a large degree when it comes to their strategic approaches. But again, look at the realities. How much charging infrastructure is already available? It's a big topic. It's a big topic in Germany. I'm not sure about Bratislava, I have to say. But it's in many cities through Europe and certainly in other places in the world. It is a big topic, and I can tell you, for example, that for the time being, we fleet into our car-sharing fleet. We have Drive Now, it is called. Some people will know it probably. Worldwide car-sharing operation. We get more and more electric vehicles into these fleets. And in return, we arrange with cities where we have this fleet running that they build up the charging infrastructure. So it is basically a contract. The more electric vehicles we bring into the fleet, the more the cities are supporting that with charging infrastructure, not only for our cars, obviously, but for all the cars. Often then trying to utilize a public-private partnership model in order to make that happen. And yes, the future of mobility in cities is probably not characterized in 2030 or 2040 by an endless number of sports utility vehicles, SUVs. That was probably the point that you were making. That kind of a picture is probably not the one that everyone strives for. Also, not we, right? We understand that this is not sustainable, but there's going to be a place for the individual car, no question, but it will be integrated in a multimodal traffic system that is, including sharing, let it be bikes or car sharing in general, that will obviously include public transportation and so on. I'll just give you one example from Copenhagen, one of the leaders, obviously, in that field, where we have a project running with Arriva. We gave them, they bought factually 400 BMW i3s, so 400 full electric vehicles, and got them into a car sharing fleet. And the whole traffic system in Copenhagen is utilized by customers through the so-called Riser card, which is a travel card, where you can do everything. You can do bike sharing with that card, you can do public transportation, you can do car sharing, you can do light rail, you can actually choose, but you always have the convenience of using that card to open that world of mobility.
So one card opens all doors.
Yeah. That's a data-driven approach, obviously. Here comes smart versus thinking, data that does make sense ultimately. And it's not rocket science, as you can see in the case of Copenhagen. It's feasible. And we hope to see more of that. And we are going to be part of that, no question.
Matúš, an EIB survey in 2018 found that 70% of municipalities consider fiscal constraints to be a major obstacle as they try to move forward with their future visions, whether it involves major infrastructure, et cetera. How are you financing your Bratislava plan?
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
It always is.
On the political level, of course, it's very difficult to talk about more density because people are in Bratislava with a very huge development boom from 2000 after 2010 and so on as a very hot topic. But we are lucky because we don't have big density in Bratislava, so we still have a possibility to grow in our city without be forced to build satellite cities or outskirts, which are in economical and in a sociological way very bad solution for the city. So imagine again, I know it's Vienna, but if we are making comparison with Vienna, the size of the two cities are nearly similar. But in Vienna, they have 2 million and we are 600,000. So we still have a lot of space, which is important. And Bratislava owns still some of the space in own city, which is important as well, of course. And what we are looking now with my new team is to have a smaller debt. We have our debt, like I said, is 50%, which is we don't want to have it more, and if we will be able to make it smaller, we definitely go with some smart financing.
Do you raise taxes to achieve some of your goals, or no?
That's very tough one. Of course, we're starting with parking policies, the parking regulation, and we hope we will have some money from it every year. We need to see how it goes, and we have possibility to raise the local taxes, some local taxes. It's a possibility. They are very small. In European level, they are very small. And if I will be forced to do that because of better development of city, I will do that.
And maybe just as an addition, also we see clearly that ultimately a smart, sorry for using that term again, a smart way to do pricing also for mobility, for example, is going to be also a given. It is totally needed, and there might be some revenues out of that, but even more important is the signal to organize the city in order to make sure that the sustainability goals and the development goals are achieved. So we will see very soon much more road pricing, much more city pricing, access pricing, and we need to do that in a way so that it makes ecologically sense and also delivers what is needed, that is a good mobility performance, because mobility absolutely relates also to the economic activities of a city. It is a total necessity to have a good mobility infrastructure in cities, but it's changing right now.
Maybe if I may chip in on the financing question, I think one tool that, in my sense, is under-deployed for financing city growth and smartness and improvement is forms of land value capture. And you may agree or disagree. I have no idea what the situation in Bratislava is, but the situation is that cities invest in better infrastructure, in better quality of life outcomes, and better amenities for cities, security, all those things that make the city and, of course, all the real estate in the city much more valuable. And in most situations, that means someone who's sitting on a plot of land, plot of urban land, just waits for the actor, the city, to do its job, and then reaps a huge profit when he sells or develops. That profit, in my sense of a market economy, belongs to the city in good share. And that is big value and a big lever for financing.
Go ahead, Vazil.
Sorry, I'm a banker, so when I'm talking about financing, I have to say something. But now, obviously, what Matúš mentioned, Mayor mentioned, is a big issue not only in Slovakia but throughout the region, because you have these so-called debt caps on the municipal and also on the regional level. So the mayors or heads of municipalities and regions, they have to be very careful how much they invest, how much money they spend, so that they don't breach this debt cap, debt level. And also I think this is something which is very closely monitored by the citizens, by the opposition, and so on. So the question is, how do you finance especially larger projects in this kind of constrained situation? One possibility is to look for different so-called off-balance sheet operations where the financing is not aggregated into the budget of the municipality or the region. We are quite often working as the bank, for example, with the different municipal companies, transport company, the waste management company, etc., which in many cases is off balance sheet. So basically, the financing does not go into the debt structure of the municipality. Or there are interesting structures, for example, for the energy efficiency, so-called energy performance contracting, where a private provider of energy efficiency, when you improve the energy efficiency, especially in public buildings, because municipalities, cities, they have many schools, hospitals, local different offices, etc., which consume a lot of energy. And you, by decreasing the energy consumption, by improving the quality of the buildings, you save a lot of energy, and also, of course, improve the environment and so on. So if you have a private company which does it for the municipality and invests into this, and then the company is paid by the savings on the energy, then basically this operation is also not aggregated into the debt. So there are structures of this type which can be, I think, in a creative way utilized by mayors, by municipalities to deal with the issue of the limitations of the debt break.
Right, fascinating. Now, we're going to be going to questions shortly, and you can either ask them in person. I think we have someone who will have a microphone ready to come to you. And you can also submit them on Slido, and then they'll pop up on the screen, and I'll share them with the audience, with my panel, and with all of you. But I'd like to go to the mayor for one final question. Mr. Mayor, I've heard you talk about Vienna a little bit and some of the things they have that you might want to emulate. Is that the city that is the model that you'd like to follow, or is there another one somewhere else in the globe that someday, Bratislava wants to be and then fill in the blank of Slovakia? What is your ideal city?
I spend a lot of times on different conferences. I spend a lot of time on different conferences organized by Bloomberg or Atlantic even, and there are so many good examples in the world, and what is very good that
Name a few then.
I mean, I can start with New York, which was a big inspiration. Of course, different scale, different frame, law frame or legislative frame, but there are so many bright ideas, of course, coming from there. And I was glad that I interviewed for Slovak magazine Janet Sedikan, for example. She was a director of transportation director. She was a director of Department of Transportation of City of New York under the Bloomberg. And what is good on these different meetings of the mayors, that every mayor is always happy to share success, If they are successful in something, they always share. So the ideas are pretty much always on the table. And I always use this expression that in art you cannot use copying. You cannot do that but in doing the cities, we the inspiration and sometimes also copying some stuff is very, very good. It's very necessary to do that, and mainly in a situation where Bratislava is now, I feel Bratislava is quite a lot behind other cities on European levels, for example.
How so?
There's so many issues. For example, we didn't have open data. We didn't work with open data. Our data, which are every day we aggregating thousands of data, so they are not available for public. This is just the start. We can talk about how many flats Bratislava owns. Bratislava owns 945 flats, which is absolutely tragic fact. So we don't have housing. We don't have this important instrument, which is so important. So this is one of my biggest challenges, to build new houses. So there are so many. We can talk about security. We can talk about the using of technologies. For example, also using technology for security in the street. And as I said, I know that Vienna is on very different levels, the top of the world, but I always like to learn from the best. And we are actually Vienna, Bratislava is two closest capital cities in world, or I think so. And we have a good relationship. This is where I want to go. You have New York, but you have Brno, which is the second biggest city of Czech Republic, and they made during the last 4 years great work with homelessness. There was working the program called Housing First, where you stopping homelessness, giving the houses to the homeless people, not work, no, but housing. That's always the theme. So a lot of inspiration, and I'm always continuing to see what's happening outside of Slovakia and different cities.
Thank you. Well, let's go to questions, and if you would identify yourself, please.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Peter Stano. I'm from the Slovak Foreign Ministry, where I am coordinator for migration. So that indicates where my question is going to. You've been talking about challenges such as housing, mobility, economic activity, but only Mr. Hudák so far mentioned migration briefly. We know that big cities, large cities, are to a large extent formed also by migrants. Bratislava is full of migrants from all the corners of Slovakia, including myself. But don't worry, Mr. Vallo, I'm paying my taxes here. I'm a registered resident. But the economic activity and the possibilities of the cities are, of course, attracting migrants. When I say migrants or migration, I have in mind regular migration of the workforce, mainly. How do you see, and also taking into account the name of this panel, Cities Driving for Change, how do you see the role of the cities, of the municipalities, in influencing the national policies on migration, regulated migration of the workforce? Because there are examples, including Munich, that cities can actually achieve a lot and they can make a change when the politicians on national level are failing or not delivering on the migration. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try. I mean, certainly a big issue, especially in Slovakia, for example, where, as we know, the regional differences are very, very high, and many people migrate from the less developed parts of Slovakia to, obviously, Bratislava or the parts of the country which are more developed, and it creates, obviously, a challenge for the country itself, how to deal with the regional differences, and secondly, obviously, for the recipient municipalities or regions, how to deal with this new group of people. One thing which we are addressing as a bank, because one of the issues, obviously, for these so-called migrants or new people in the community is the issue of housing, and rental housing, availability of rental housing is something which is very important. It's also very important for the labor force mobility within the country itself. So we have joint programs with different municipalities throughout Europe, European Union, where we actually support construction development of rental housing, which is in many cases used especially to target the commuting or the migrant population. Of course, then you have a different type of migrants who are migrants from outside of the country. There the issue is probably a little more complex and challenging. Obviously, in our policies, as the bank, being a public development bank, we make sure that any solutions we provide do not lead to any ghettoization, creating ghettos for some groups of population. And here I think cities can be very, very important drivers also for the national policy, because we do have, as you know, many discussions also in the V4 countries and our region how to deal with migration, meaning migration not internal but external. And I think cities can provide a good example how such migration actually can benefit the countries and can contribute in a positive way to the national economy.
Thank you, Vazil. We have a question here on Slido, and I'll go to that. The questioner, Alexander, asks, after decades of continued urbanization, is there any hope left for rural areas? What are the political consequences of cities moving faster than the rest? Who would like to take that one? Matúš?
If you are talking about the rural areas around the Bratislava, for example, it's a big challenge, because of course, Bratislava is growing very fast. We have Slovaks likes to own housing. They like to be owners of place where they are living, and what's happening that there is this satellite villages or cities are built around the Bratislava, but without good infrastructure, without good public transportation, of course. So it means more cars coming every day to Bratislava. And actually, the consummation of the land is just too big, and we're just losing this kind of countryside. And Bratislava is becoming just one big urban sprawl. So again, the density is the key word in this case, and we will try to explain to citizens that the dense city can be also good city. Doesn't really mean that they will not have a green space or they will not have a public space and use this land.
Anyone else want to chime in? No? Let's see. Do we have any other questions from the room? Let's go back to Rome here. Any other ideas? I can continue with Slido. Let's see. Well, I think I already sort of asked the example of the second question regarding examples. Interesting. Anonymous asks, who benefits from smart cities the most? Is there one segment of the population that benefits more? than another? Thoughts?
I believe that eventually the citizens benefit. I mean, the citizens of the city or
Well, the goal of the smart city is to benefit everyone,
At the
right?
end of the day, it should
Okay.
be for the citizens and improving the environment, improving the way how the city functions, whether it's about transport, about energy, about waste management. But I think I agree. I think that issue of smart cities and calling everything smart is probably too much, and we like to use it because it brings something, a flavor of new and being modern. But for us, what is important is that, and I think it was already mentioned by you, that for us, smart means that there is a strategic thinking in the city itself. You know, that we don't do ad hoc decisions and solutions, quick fixes, just because it has to be done, but that there is a strategy, a way how the leadership of the city, by also engaging citizens, and this is very important. This goes eventually to who benefits, because sometimes I think there is a view and feeling that actually who benefits are those IT companies and the providers of different solutions, maybe some car companies who provide the car sharing, pooling, and so on. But I think it's very important that behind the strategy, long-term strategy, there is also engagement of people. And for example, I always like one example from Krakow. It's a city in Poland, a beautiful city, and what they do to promote innovation internally in the city itself, they organize, I don't know, every year or every second year, but they organize a competition for the most innovative ideas for the city. And it's targeting especially younger people, basically up to 35. And then they select the best ideas, and those best ideas which are actually voted by the population on via website, a portal, then those ideas, the top 3, also have to be implemented by the leadership of the city. So I think innovation, smartness is also about communicating with people, getting them energized, getting the ideas from them, implementing those ideas in such a way. And obviously engaging private sector, I think it's very important. Private sector has to be a partner in this process, and it has to be part of the overall strategy for the city itself.
Jan, how do cities make sure as they move forward into the future that they don't leave one segment of the population behind? You know, as they're developing these thinking smart cities.
Yeah, I think the more narrow scope of smartness there is to an extent probably then even easier to achieve, because you have such a magnitude of dozens and dozens of different applications and use cases, and one benefits one segment more, one benefits another segment more. I think in the end everyone benefits. The bigger challenge, I think, are the big topics of urban development, integration with the more rural areas around, providing housing, providing infrastructure, providing public services at quality. And I think we can open up a huge discussion around all of this, but in the end it's mostly about good planning and of course also having the financing behind the plans. And I kind of allow me that one other comment on the financing in that regard. I'm really kind of applauding a lot of those efforts on finding ways to off balance sheet and so on, find all kinds of financing cities. It still escapes me why that is actually necessary. Why do not public cities, governments, national governments have balance sheets like every corporation on this planet, where assets are on the balance sheet, and if you add a liability next to it, it's a wash, it's fine, you can do it.
Interesting. I'm going to go to one more question here from Slido. From Anonymous, what role are upcoming demographic trends, in other words, aging generation on one side, the ability to work from anywhere on the other side, what role are those changing trends, these upcoming trends, playing in the strategies of smart cities? And I know, Matúš, that in Bratislava you have an issue with the population aging, and will soon become one of the oldest in Europe, correct?
Correct. Of course, aging is a big topic around Europe and European cities for many years. And again, it's let's talk. We can talk about it on two levels. The first one is policy level. So how are we going to make how are we going to spend our money for what the group of citizens in which manner we are going to use money, and who needs help and who needs our support, and also in Bratislava plan the aging and seniors were big topic, and after you have a very another level, very simple level, and you can easily do it. You can very easily talk about how to make a better day for our more senior, for our oldest. Bratislava has different cultural programs, for example, during the day, which can be used. Now we're going to do a competition for our own bench. So we're going to own design for a new Bratislava bench. And the talk is that we are going to, of course, do the size where seating is on high of 45 centimeters, but also the seating is high on 65 centimeters, which is maybe looks strange, but it's much easier for seniors to step from it. These are different levels, and I would like to embrace both levels, the high level of the policies, but also the very simple changes in public space.
Go ahead, Vazil.
Yes, on this topic, because I think it's very interesting. I mean, aging is, I think, mostly is viewed as a danger, as a threat. Yes, because obviously you have less population, which is in productive age, which can produce economic products, etc. But on the other hand, one of the fastest growing parts of global economy, so-called grey economy. You have huge new segments of economy which have to cater to the aging population, because most of these people are they live longer, they want to be active post 60, and you have huge segment of services, tourism, new things which can be certainly healthcare, which can be developed for this segment of population. So it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity also for cities to actually utilize this new trend phenomenon as a way to be those hubs of innovation and generation of the new economic developments and new economic services.
Andreas, I'd like to give you the last word before we wrap then.
Very kind. As I'm reaching now 50, I like the idea of aging not being a problem, but actually an opportunity. I speak for many in the room, I guess. But no, I just wanted to add that in terms of mobility, just to give you one example, autonomous driving and aging is again also an indication of how we generate actually social participation through technology, right? So in the very near future, you can take that as a potential, you can take it as a threat as well. Older people will be much more mobile just for the simple fact that they don't need to drive themselves, but they are basically, passenger in an autonomous car or vehicle, let's put it more general. And with that, they have the capabilities to do more than they used to. And, when you come from a humanistic point of view, that is certainly a big advantage. It has to be dealt with because it potentially means also more vehicle miles traveled in cities, so more traffic. But there again, innovation and technology used in a smart way can provide here the ability to combine the social factor and the urban intelligence.
Well, please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Andreas, Matúš, Vazil, Jan, you were fabulous. And thank you for your wonderful questions. Whoever submitted them on Slido, they were terrific. We are wrapped, and please know that there are other sessions in other rooms. Make sure and go and enjoy.